My name is Madison Reynolds. At 33, I've carved out a thriving and independent career in the world of real estate investment. But 3 years ago, everything changed. My parents were taken from me in a horrific accident, a collision that left no survivors. In the aftermath of that tragedy, I inherited their cherished property. It was a beautiful, memory-filled home where my brother Ryan and I had grown up. Seeing him crumble under the weight of grief, I offered him a lifeline. I let him move into the family home, free of charge. It felt like the right thing to do. For a while, things went smoothly. He was slowly rebuilding his life, but that piece unraveled rapidly once Allison came into the picture. After a whirlwind romance, Ryan married her and she had no clue that the house they were living in wasn't his. I still remember the moment she stood in the kitchen, her voice laced with venom, yelling, "You're a pathetic 40-year-old leech. Get out." I couldn't help but laugh, genuinely amused. "Try to make me," I replied coolly. If you're watching this and find yourself constantly frustrated by entitled people, hit like and subscribe. You won't want to miss how this story unfolds. Growing up, Ryan and I were incredibly close, despite the 4-year age difference. I always assumed the role of protector, especially given how often our dad's engineering job uprooted our family. By the time we hit our teenage years, we had lived in 5 different states. Through all that instability, we were each other's anchor. Those formative years taught me adaptability and resilience, traits I would later lean on heavily as I carved out a life on my own. While Ryan gravitated toward creativity and eventually pursued graphic design, I was drawn to something different: real estate. It started back in college. I had been awarded a generous scholarship, and with some of the leftover funds and a part-time job, I scraped together just enough to buy a decrepit apartment in a not-so-great part of town. I spent my weekends knee-deep in paint, tile, and elbow grease. When I flipped that place for a small profit, something inside me clicked. I'd found my calling. By the time I hit 25, I had amassed a portfolio of rental properties across the city. I wasn't just making ends meet, I was thriving. Our parents were both stunned and proud. Mom, who taught literature at the local high school, and Dad, a meticulous engineer, had always emphasized the importance of financial independence. While they had envisioned a more conventional path for me, they supported my decision wholeheartedly. Meanwhile, Ryan was thriving in his own way, working as a designer for a well-regarded marketing firm. His creativity and dedication had earned him promotions and accolades. Life was good. Until the unimaginable happened. 3 years ago, our parents were coming home from a cozy anniversary dinner when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into their vehicle. The crash was instant and fatal. Our world collapsed in a heartbeat. As the executor of their will, I inherited the family house and 2 modest rental properties they'd intended to use as retirement income. Ryan was granted their financial assets and investment accounts, a split that had been carefully planned based on our respective strengths and interests. I had the skills to manage property. Ryan had no desire to be a landlord. What none of us foresaw was the depth of despair Ryan would fall into. Within 6 months of the accident, the vibrant brother I knew was gone. His job performance nosedived. He missed deadlines, avoided meetings, and eventually he was let go. His longtime girlfriend, overwhelmed and heartbroken, left him not long after. I watched him unravel from a distance, and it hurt more than I can say. When Ryan confided that he couldn't keep up with rent on his apartment anymore, I didn't hesitate. The family house was just sitting there, untouched, silent, and full of memories. I already lived downtown, closer to my work and clients, in a sleek loft that suited my fast-paced life. "Move into the house," I offered him one gloomy afternoon over coffee. "Take all the time you need. No rent, no pressure." For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He moved in the following week. The house, a charming 4-bedroom colonial nestled in a quiet suburban street, had once echoed with our childhood laughter. For a year and a half, peace returned. Ryan was healing. He picked up freelance work again, started running in the mornings, and even made it a habit to join me for our Sunday dinners, a tradition we kept in honor of Mom and Dad. Then came Allison. They met through a grief support group Ryan's therapist had suggested. According to her, she had lost her husband in a tragic workplace incident 2 years earlier. From the moment they connected, Ryan was smitten. In retrospect, I wish I'd paid closer attention to the warning signs. She inserted herself into his life at lightning speed, isolating him from nearly everyone else, including me. Only 3 months after meeting, Ryan called to tell me they were getting married. "We're doing it," he announced, voice brimming with joy I hadn't heard in ages. I tried to hide my shock. "That's fast," I managed. "When you know," he replied. The wedding was held at the county courthouse with just a few close friends and relatives. I smiled through it all, determined to be supportive despite my growing misgivings. Allison, with her manicured nails and designer outfits, always looked like she had stepped out of a catalog, but her polished exterior felt more curated than genuine. During the low-key reception at a local bistro, I couldn't ignore her subtle digs. She redirected Ryan every time I tried to speak with him. "She's just nervous," he said later, trying to explain her behavior. But her actions painted a different story. She corrected Ryan's table manners publicly, dismissed his honeymoon idea with a smirk, and gave my outfit a once-over before asking pointedly, "Don't you ever dress like a real woman?" I bit my tongue. Ryan had endured so much pain. If she was the one making him feel alive again, I could tolerate her. I even handed them a generous check as a wedding gift, something that Allison quickly tucked into her handbag with practiced ease, not even letting Ryan glance at it. After the wedding, their life in the family home took on a new rhythm, one that increasingly excluded me. Where Ryan used to text me updates or funny anecdotes about his day, I now received silence. Invitations to dinner were frequently declined with flimsy excuses, and when I did stop by, Allison always seemed to be just heading out or curiously occupied with something urgent. It wasn't long before I started hearing about changes being made to the house. New decor, furniture rearranged, family photos missing from the walls. I tried to keep my distance, but part of me couldn't shake the unease growing in my gut. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced with a box of our mother's old books I thought Ryan might want. Allison answered the door with a tight smile. "He's not home," she said flatly, making no move to invite me in. I held up the box. "These were Mom's," I said. "Just wanted to drop them off." She took them reluctantly, muttering something about clutter. When I finally caught Ryan alone a few weeks later, I asked him how things were going. His eyes darted, and he gave a vague answer about adjusting to married life. But the man who once confided in me about everything now seemed like a shadow of himself, walking on eggshells, always watching what he said. Something was very wrong, and I had a sinking feeling it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. And I was right. It started with a text, short, cold, and clearly not from Ryan. "You need to leave the house. Keys, this is our home now." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Moments later, a call from Ryan came through. His voice was apologetic, tense. "Allison found the deed papers," he admitted. "She's upset. She didn't know you still owned the house." "She didn't know?" I repeated, stunned. "You didn't tell her?" She thought. "She assumed it was mine," he mumbled. That night I lay awake, angry not just at Allison's entitlement, but at my brother's silence. I had given him a home when he had nothing, and now his wife, a woman who'd been in his life for barely a year, was demanding I hand it over as if it were hers by right. But I wasn't going to be bullied. Not by her, not by anyone. "We should have her over for dinner soon," Ryan said warmly as we embraced in the hallway that evening. It was one of those casual moments that, at the time, seemed unremarkable, but later as I replayed his words in my mind, one detail struck me with surprising weight. He'd said the house, not your house. That subtle shift, barely noticeable in the moment, would turn out to be far more telling than I could have imagined. 2 weeks after their courthouse wedding, I made my way back to our childhood home for what had long been a cherished ritual. Sunday dinner. Ryan had sent a cheerful message that morning, letting me know Allison was looking forward to hosting. Hoping to extend an olive branch, I picked out a nice bottle of red wine and chose a delicate orchid in a ceramic pot as a housewarming gift. But the moment I crossed the threshold, something felt off. The entryway no longer felt familiar. The antique console table, once a fixture from our mother's collection, was gone. In its place stood a minimalist, high-gloss table, modern, cold, and devoid of character. The soft, welcoming beige walls had been painted a sterile white, and every family photo had vanished. Not a single frame, not a single smiling face from our past remained. "We've been redecorating," Ryan said, stepping forward with a tentative smile when he noticed my stunned expression. "Allison has a great eye for interiors." Allison appeared then, emerging from the kitchen in a spotless apron that looked more designer than practical. "Madison, perfect timing," she chirped, her lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ryan, take her coat, honey." As Ryan took my jacket and disappeared into the hall closet, I took in more of the living room. Gone was the plush sectional where we had sprawled out for countless movie nights. In its place sat a sharp-edged leather sofa, expensive, sleek, and about as inviting as a waiting room. The bookshelves, once lined with our mother's art books and photo albums, had been replaced by geometric decor and abstract sculptures. The place looks different, I said carefully. It was so outdated, Allison replied before Ryan could answer. All those clunky antiques and gloomy tones were bringing it into the modern era. I pressed my lips together, swallowing the comment about those clunky antiques being family heirlooms. Instead, I gestured toward the now empty wall. Did you store Mom's console table? That piece had been in the family for generations. Ryan hesitated. Allison answered for him. We donated a few things to make room for our new life together. You can't build a future if you're always clinging to the past, right? Throughout dinner, I noticed unsettling changes in Ryan. He seemed on edge, glancing at Allison before answering simple questions, avoiding familiar stories from our childhood. When I reminisced about our summer camping trips, he quickly changed the subject, as Allison's expression stiffened. So, Madison, she said brightly as she served a glossy dessert I didn't recognize, don't you ever feel a little lonely? Living all by yourself in that industrial apartment, no husband, no little ones running around? I set my fork down gently. I'm happy, I said calmly. My career keeps me busy, and I have great people in my life. But you're what, 33 now? She pressed, laughing lightly. Tick-tock, right? That biological clock doesn't stop. Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside her but stayed silent. I've never measured my worth by my relationship status, I said evenly, but I appreciate your concern. Later, as we cleared the dishes, Allison launched into their plans for a kitchen renovation. We're thinking granite counters, maybe brushed gold fixtures. The mortgage is paid off, so it's the perfect time to upgrade. I nearly dropped the plate I was rinsing. Mortgage? I echoed. Oh, Ryan told me his parents left him the house outright, she continued casually. Such a blessing, starting off a marriage without debt. I glanced at Ryan, who was suddenly preoccupied with arranging dishes in the washer, refusing to meet my gaze. After Allison stepped out to prepare coffee, I tugged Ryan aside. She thinks you own the house, I whispered, stunned. He sighed, eyes clouded with guilt. Please, don't say anything, Maddie. She assumed that when we started dating and I never corrected her. You let her believe you owned it? I asked, my voice rising. I didn't mean for it to snowball, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, an old nervous habit. Allison's big on appearances, security. I was barely keeping it together when we met. If she'd known I was staying in my sister's house for free, I don't think… Ryan, relationships should be based on honesty, I said gently. I'll tell her, he promised, just, not yet. Please, we're still adjusting. Against my better judgment, I agreed to keep quiet. I told myself the details didn't matter. It was still the family home. If pretending helped Ryan regain stability, I could swallow my discomfort, temporarily. But as the weeks went by, things only grew more strained. My once welcomed visits were now met with awkward tension. Allison started commenting on my unexpected drop-ins, even though I always texted beforehand. She questioned why I still had a key and subtly suggested it was invasive. Each time, Ryan would glance at me with quiet regret but never spoke up. I began noticing more and more of our family's belongings disappearing. The grandfather clock that had chimed in our hallway for decades? Gone. Dad's prized collection of first edition mysteries? Missing. Mom's hand-painted dishes? Ones we used every holiday? Replaced with sleek ceramic sets that screamed department store catalog. When I asked, Allison gave dismissive answers. We're decluttering, just making space, trying to simplify. The vague explanations felt like a smokescreen. I was being erased from the very home I had preserved, for Ryan, for both of us. Sunday dinners became infrequent, often rescheduled or abruptly canceled. Twice I showed up at the agreed time, only to find an empty driveway, and a text apologizing for forgotten plans. The emotional toll crept in slowly. It wasn't just about furniture or traditions. It was about watching my brother slip further into a role that didn't suit him. He was quieter, always careful, often deferring to Allison's lead. He no longer laughed freely or teased me like he used to. He seemed like a guest in his own skin, and I felt like an intruder in what had once been my home, too. 3 months into their marriage, the facade began to crack. My visits, once weekly, had dwindled to cold, obligatory encounters. I felt unwelcome, like a stranger passing through. One Tuesday, needing to retrieve tax documents I had stored in the house's office years ago, I decided to stop by, unannounced, for the first time ever. I didn't know it then, but that decision would mark the beginning of the end. The drive there was familiar, yet as I approached the house, a lump formed in my throat. The once inviting front porch now felt foreign, sterilized by new furniture and stripped of its soul. I knocked, half hoping no one would answer. but the door opened almost immediately. Allison stood there, eyes narrowed slightly as if expecting a solicitor. "Madison," she said coolly, "is everything okay?" "I just need to grab some old tax documents," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "They're in one of the office cabinets, from before." Her smile was tight. "You should have called." "I figured it would be quick. Ryan knows I keep them here." She stepped aside reluctantly and I moved past her, my pulse thudding. The house no longer smelled like us, like wood, polish, and cinnamon and the soft scent of our mother's perfume. Now it smelled like lavender candles and something artificial. Ryan wasn't home, and in that silent space, walking through the rooms stripped of their history, I felt it with absolute clarity. This was no longer my family's home. And soon, I feared, it wouldn't even be my brother's. I had stored several important documents in the home office at the family house. Wanting to give Ryan a heads up, I sent him a quick text earlier in the day, letting him know I'd be stopping by to retrieve them. He hadn't replied, but I didn't think much of it. He'd been busy lately, or at least that was the excuse he often gave. Using the spare key I'd always had, I let myself in. "Hello? Ryan? Allison? It's Madison," I called out as I stepped through the front door. The silence that answered was heavy and unfamiliar. The house, once lively with echoes of our childhood, now felt hollow. As I made my way down the hall toward the office, I couldn't help but notice the creeping transformation. The gallery wall that had once displayed a vibrant timeline of our family, birthdays, holidays, school plays, was now replaced with soulless, abstract prints, artwork that looked as though it had been lifted straight from a generic hotel suite. My steps slowed when I passed what used to be my parents' bedroom. The door was shut tightly, with a decorative plaque affixed to the front that read, "Master Suite, Private." The message was clear. This space no longer welcomed me. Inside the office, I moved to the metal filing cabinet where I'd stored old tax returns and legal documents. I expected to find everything in its usual order, but as I slid open the drawers, confusion crept in. Entire folders were gone. The house deed, property records, even copies of our parents' wills. The once orderly drawers had been reorganized, and many personal files were missing altogether. Frowning, I scanned the room and spotted my father's antique roll-top desk in the corner. It had been his favorite workspace, passed down from his own father. Now it was covered with a cloth and repurposed as a stand for an enormous, flat-screen TV. The sight made my stomach churn. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was erasure. On a hunch, I rolled up the desk's tambour cover and peered inside the small compartment where Dad used to store important keepsakes. It was empty. I was about to leave when a flicker of light caught my eye. Allison's laptop was sitting open on the desk. Curiosity prickled through me. On the screen was a web page from an online marketplace. The featured listing showed my mother's cherished Tiffany lamp, a gift from our grandmother on her wedding day. The caption read, "Authentic Tiffany-style lamp, excellent condition, $800.00." My pulse quickened. I felt physically sick. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the listing. Then, cautiously, I browsed other items listed under the same seller name. My breath caught as I scrolled. Dad's rare first edition novels, Mom's silver serving pieces, even the hand-painted oil miniatures that once lined the dining room wall. All of them were being sold off, auctioned to strangers. Our family's history dismantled and priced for profit. At that moment, I heard the front door open and Allison's voice calling for Ryan. Panic surged. I quickly closed the laptop and backed away from the desk, my mind racing with what to say. As I descended the stairs, Allison entered the room, her expression shifting from polite surprise to suspicion. "Madison, what a surprise," she said, masking the frost in her tone with a tight smile. "I texted Ryan earlier," I said, holding up a folder I had managed to salvage. "Just needed to grab some tax paperwork." "Really?" she said, her tone laced with disbelief. "He didn't mention anything." "How did you get in?" "I used my key," I said, watching Ryan enter the room behind her, his face already clouded with unease. "Your key?" Allison repeated, turning to Ryan. "I thought we discussed this." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. I meant to talk to you, Maddie. It's just, we value our privacy as a married couple." Allison cut in sharply. "It's inappropriate for you to have unrestricted access to our home." I took a slow breath. "I understand boundaries, but this has been our family's home for over 15 years. I've always had a key." "Well, things change when people get married," she said with a sugary smile. "I'm sure you understand, or would if you'd ever settled down." I ignored the dig and turned to Ryan. Can we talk, privately, about the family items that are disappearing? Ryan's face paled. What items? The Tiffany lamp, Dad's books, Mom's silver pieces, I said, watching his shoulders slump. I saw the listings, Ryan, online. Allison stepped in between us. Those things were just collecting dust. We're creating our own home now. They're heirlooms, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They have real value, monetary and emotional. Allison's right, she snapped. Ryan inherited the contents of the house. He can do what he wants. I stared at my brother. Is that what you told her, that you inherited everything? Ryan didn't respond. His eyes fell to the floor. Allison, maybe we should talk about this later, he mumbled. There's nothing to discuss, she said firmly. Your sister needs to respect our property and our boundaries. The irony hit me like a slap. She was claiming ownership over a home that didn't legally belong to her, or to Ryan. I wanted to scream, to lay it all bare, but when I looked at Ryan, truly, looked, I saw the pain in his eyes, and I couldn't do it. Not like this. Ryan, I said softly, some of those things mean everything to me. They're all we have left of Mom and Dad. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of the brother I remembered, the one who shared a bond with me no one else could understand. But then Allison placed a hand on his arm, and the shutters came down. We need to make our own memories now, Maddie, he said, his voice hollow. Maybe you could just take whatever's important to you. I nodded slowly, clinging to that small allowance. That would be helpful. It's not much, just Mom's jewelry box, the family photo albums, a few books. Absolutely not, Allison snapped. We've already promised the books to a collector, and the jewelry is part of Ryan's inheritance. Something broke inside me. Ryan, I said, voice trembling, is this really what you want, to erase every trace of our family? Don't guilt him, Allison said venomously. Just because your life is empty doesn't mean you can cling to your brother forever. Ryan finally spoke, but it wasn't what I'd hoped to hear. Maybe it's best if you go now, Maddie. We can talk later. I left with only the folder in hand. I felt hollow. 2 days later, I returned, only to find my key no longer worked. I tried the lock several times, disbelief flooding me, before Ryan texted. His message was short, apologetic. Allison thought it best to change the locks. For security. He promised to set aside the items I'd requested. We scheduled a time. I showed up. No one answered. This pattern repeated for weeks. Ryan would make vague promises, schedule times to meet, only to cancel or ghost me entirely. The doors to my past were being closed, literally and figuratively, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. A month had passed without a word from Ryan. Then, one afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. Attached were several photos of a storage unit, Unit 35 at Secure Store on Maple Street, according to the brief, impersonal text. In the pictures, I saw a scattering of boxes. None of them contained the items I had specifically asked for. No photo albums, no books, no jewelry box, just old clothes, mismatched kitchenware, and odds and ends our mother had once tucked away in attic corners. The message itself was equally cold. Ryan asked me to let you know you can pick these up. Code is 5528. I stared at the images for a long moment, trying to process what I was seeing. These weren't heirlooms. They weren't keepsakes. They were what Allison clearly deemed discardable leftovers. My pulse quickened as I dialed Ryan's number. The phone rang once, then again, but when it connected, it wasn't Ryan who answered. Ryan's busy, Allison said briskly. Allison, I asked, startled. Yes, we've been more than generous with what we've given you. It's time you stopped harassing us. Harassing? I echoed, stunned. I'm asking for pieces of our family. I'm trying to preserve memories. Family memories? She scoffed. You mean your parents' old junk? Ryan is moving on with his life. You should try it sometime. Before I could speak again, she ended the call. The next time I tried to reach Ryan, my calls went straight to voicemail. Eventually, he sent a short message, taking a break from all the drama. I'll reach out when things calm down. It felt like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just losing physical ties to my parents. I was losing my brother, too. For days, I wrestled with what to do. Should I assert my legal claim to the house, potentially severing my relationship with Ryan completely, or continue watching in silent agony as Allison dismantled everything that tied us to our past? The decision was made, for me, when I saw through a mutual friend's social media post that Ryan and Allison were hosting a housewarming party at my house. There were balloons, banners, trays of catered hors d'oeuvres and smiling faces, toasting with wine on the porch I grew up on. I hadn't been invited, not even informed. For a moment I considered crashing it, just showing up demanding answers in front of their friends. But I knew it wouldn't help. It would only feed the narrative Allison was already spinning, that I was meddling, bitter, desperate. Instead, I waited. Sunday came, our traditional family dinner day, and I baked an apple pie using our mother's cherished recipe, a peace offering, a symbol, something grounding, something real. When I rang the doorbell, I could hear music playing inside. After a long pause, the door cracked open and Allison's face appeared. Her expression was frosty, her eyes narrowing the moment she saw me. "Madison, this isn't a good time," she said curtly. "I won't stay," I replied, offering a gentle smile. "Just wanted to drop this off. It's for Sunday dinner. Is Ryan home?" She didn't open the door any further. "We have plans." "Please," I said softly, "just 5 minutes with my brother." She sighed dramatically. "Wait here." The door shut in my face. Several minutes later, it opened again. This time Ryan stepped out. He looked tired, older, and deeply uncomfortable. "Hey, Maddie," he said, avoiding my eyes. "This really isn't a good day." "It's Sunday," I said quietly. "Family dinner. I brought Mom's apple pie." I held up the pie, still warm from the oven. Ryan glanced over his shoulder, then stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. "Look, Allison and I have friends coming soon. Can we talk another time?" "Another time?" I repeated. "Ryan, you've ignored or canceled every single time I've tried to see you." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Things have just been busy. With the house, renovations." "I saw the party," I said softly. "It looked nice." His face colored. "Maddie, I—" The door flung open behind him. Allison stepped out, arms folded, her eyes cold and furious. "This is exactly what I've been talking about," she snapped. "Unannounced visits, guilt trips about outdated family traditions." "I texted yesterday," I said calmly, "and Ryan never responded. And I saw her try not to show her fear of me anymore. Everyone called her mother, my mother. We had our own answers, but then, one night, I found her forcing herself into our lives." "I'm not forcing anything," I said, my voice steady. "I'm trying to stay connected to my only brother." Allison rolled her eyes. "Always the victim. Ryan has a new family now, me. He doesn't need you hovering like some sad, lonely spinster." "Enough," Ryan muttered, wincing. "No, Ryan. It's time someone said it." She turned to me, her voice sharp and rising. "You're a pathetic, clingy leech. Get out, and stay out of our house." Something inside me broke. After months of silence, of watching her carve away everything that had once felt sacred, I laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a nervous one. A full, incredulous, from-the-belly laugh that echoed on the porch. Allison's jaw clenched. "You think this is funny? I'll call the police. Have you removed for trespassing?" "Oh, please," I said, still chuckling. "Please do. I'd love to see their faces." Ryan looked panicked. "Madison, please, let's not escalate this." "No, Ryan," I said, suddenly calm. "I've kept quiet out of respect. I let you stay here. I tolerated Allison selling off heirlooms, locking me out, erasing every trace of our family. But I'm done." Allison narrowed her eyes. "Your house," she said venomously. "This is our home. Ryan inherited it." "Actually," I said, reaching into my purse, "he inherited their financial assets. I inherited the house." I pulled out a folder and opened it. "The deed is in my name," I continued. "I've been letting Ryan stay here rent-free since our parents died, to help him get back on his feet." Ryan's face drained of color. "Maddie, I can't explain." Allison snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them. Her face went pale, then flushed deep crimson. "You lied to me," she said, turning on Ryan. "You said you own this place." "I was going to tell you," Ryan stammered. "All this time," she shrieked. "We've been living in her house, making upgrades to her property, while she had a key, while she could walk in whenever she wanted." She was shaking with rage, her voice rising so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear. Ryan, caught between us, looked completely broken. "Allison," I said quietly, "no one forced you to spend a dime. No one told you to renovate a home you didn't own." She turned to me, trembling. "You let me decorate. You let me believe." "I let my brother stay here. You inserted yourself into that arrangement." Ryan put his hands up. "Can we all just take a breath?" "No," Allison snapped. "You lied to me about everything. You let me believe we were building something together. I turned to Ryan. You could have told her the truth months ago. But you didn't. You let her rewrite everything. Our home, our memories, our history. He looked at me then, his eyes watery and red. I didn't know how to fix it. I just wanted peace. And look what silence has cost you. Allison glared at him, then at me, before storming back into the house and slamming the door. For a moment, neither of us moved. I never wanted this, Ryan whispered. I know, I said gently. But it's been coming for a long time. He nodded slowly. Can we talk, just us? He nodded. Only if we're honest this time. And with that, the door that had been shut between us for so long finally creaked open, just a little. Allison stormed back into the house, fury radiating from every step. She snatched her phone from the kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she tapped the screen. I'm calling the police, she snapped. This has to be fraud or something. Go ahead, I replied calmly, stepping in behind her. Call them, I have all the documentation right here. I set the folder on the glass coffee table. A piece so out of place it looked like it belonged in a showroom, not our parents' cozy living room. Ryan stood frozen in the doorway, pale and silent, caught like a deer in headlights, as Allison paced and muttered to herself. She dialed 911 with frantic urgency. I need to report a fraud, she told the dispatcher, her voice breathless with rage. My husband's sister is trying to steal our home. She's threatening us, refusing to leave the property. I sat patiently on the leather couch that had replaced our childhood sectional, folding my hands neatly in my lap. The folder with the deed, property tax records, and a copy of our parents' will rested in front of me like a loaded weapon. Quiet, undeniable, final. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. Officer Jenkins, a tall middle-aged man with a measured demeanor, led the way. His partner, Officer Ramirez, younger and visibly tense, lingered just behind him, scanning the tension in the air like it was about to explode. Good afternoon, Jenkins said after introductions. What seems to be the issue today? Allison launched into her version of events before he finished the question. This woman is harassing us. She's making up lies about owning this house. She barged in and refuses to leave. Officer Jenkins raised a hand to slow her down, then turned to me. Ma'am? I inherited this home 3 years ago after my parents died, I explained, keeping my tone level. My brother has been living here rent-free, with my permission ever since. I have the documents to prove it. I handed Officer Ramirez the folder. He examined each page closely, while Officer Jenkins took notes, occasionally glancing at Ryan, who remained rooted to the spot near the stairs. These appeared to be in order, Ramirez finally said. The deed is clear. This property is registered to Madison Reynolds. Allison's face crumpled in disbelief. That can't be. Ryan told me he owned this house. The officers turned to Ryan. Sir, Officer Jenkins said, his tone firm but not unkind, did you misrepresent ownership of this property to your wife? Ryan's voice was barely more than a whisper. I didn't correct her. She assumed and I let her believe it. So you've been residing here with your sister's permission? Jenkins clarified. Ryan nodded, miserably. Yes. Allison let out a strangled cry of rage. You pathetic coward. You let me believe this was ours. I've been telling people this was our family home, planning renovations, building a life here. Ma'am, please lower your voice, Officer Ramirez said calmly. I will not, she shouted. I've been lied to and manipulated. With a sudden furious motion, she grabbed a decorative vase from the side table and hurled it against the wall. The crash echoed through the room as porcelain shattered into 1,000 pieces. Ma'am, Jenkins said sharply, stepping forward. Control yourself. If you damage any more property, we'll have to take action. Take action against me? She screamed. I am the victim here. She turned on Ryan, jabbing a finger into his chest. You spineless worm, living off your sister like some charity case while pretending to be a successful homeowner. Ryan shrank back, visibly shaken. Allison, please, I can explain. Explain, she bellowed, grabbing a framed photo from the mantel, one from their wedding, and hurling it to the ground. Glass sprayed across the floor. That's enough, Jenkins barked. Ma'am, you need to calm down or you'll be leaving in our car. This is my home, she shrieked, reaching for another object. Ramirez moved quickly, catching her wrist before she could throw it. Legally it's not, he said, voice firm. And you're now destroying property that doesn't belong to you. I'm only asserting ownership of the home and certain heirlooms, I interjected. The newer items are theirs. Jenkins nodded. Even so, Ms. Reynolds has every right to ask anyone to leave her property. Given the current circumstances, I strongly advise you step outside and cool off." Allison yanked her arm free. "This is insane. You can't make me leave." "Actually, we can," Jenkins said. "You have two options. You can leave voluntarily, or we can place you under arrest for destruction of property and disorderly conduct." Something finally cracked in her. She looked at Ryan, eyes pleading. "Ryan?" He stood on the steps, looking completely broken. I should go with you. We need to talk." She whirled around, snatched her purse and stomped to the door. Just before stepping out, she turned and sneered, "Enjoy your empty house and your empty life, Madison." At least Ryan had the guts to try for something real, even if he had to lie to do it. The door slammed so hard, a picture fell from the wall. Jenkins looked at me sympathetically. "Would you like to file a report for the damage?" I shook my head, drained. "They're just things." "For what it's worth," Ramirez said gently, "you handled that a lot better than most would." When they left, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket made of stone. The house, once alive with love and laughter, now echoed with tension and heartbreak. I sat on the unfamiliar leather couch, the one Allison had chosen, and let the tears come freely. Hours passed. I wandered the rooms, touching the edges of memories now overridden. The kitchen, once a warm hub of flour-dusted joy and holiday meals, gleamed cold and metallic. Dad's study, which used to smell faintly of tobacco and wisdom, had been transformed into a bland, impersonal workspace. The upstairs hallway, once lined with photographs chronicling our childhoods, displayed nothing but abstract prints in generic frames. It was as if my family had been scrubbed away with disinfectant. Eventually, I found myself in the backyard. The grass was shorter now, the garden beds bare where Mom's dahlias used to bloom. The tire swing Dad had hung from the old maple tree was gone. Only the rusted chain remained, swaying gently in the breeze. Standing there, I remembered summer evenings chasing fireflies with Ryan, our parents watching from lawn chairs, glasses of iced tea in hand. The ghosts of those moments clung to the air, more vivid than anything currently occupying the house. This place had once been a sanctuary, now it felt like a graveyard. I walked back inside, made a list of the remaining heirlooms I needed to protect, and started boxing them up with deliberate care. Mom's jewelry box, Dad's fountain pen collection, the family albums that held our entire history between their pages. These weren't just things, they were pieces of a life, proof that we had mattered, that love had lived here once. As I packed, I left one final note for Ryan on the kitchen counter. Not angry, not accusatory, just honest. "I hope one day you remember who we were before all this. I still believe you're that person. I'll always be your sister. Love, Maddie." Then I turned off the lights, locked the door behind me, and stepped into the cool night air with the past tucked under one arm and my dignity intact. Whatever came next, I knew I had done the right thing, not just for the house, but for myself. It was as if Allison had been on a mission to erase every trace of the Reynolds family from the house, meticulously wiping away the memories and mementos of our childhood like chalk from a board. The framed photos that once lined the stairwell, the quilts our grandmother had hand-stitched, even the scent of home-cooked meals lingering in the kitchen, gone. What remained was cold, clinical, and foreign. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed, cutting through the silence like a blade. It was a message from an unknown number, though I knew immediately who it was. The message was brief. "Staying at hotel tonight. Need time to think. I'm sorry." No signature, no punctuation, just Ryan's guilt distilled into a text. I stared at it for several long minutes, rereading it like it might rearrange itself into something easier to forgive. But what was there to say in return? Sorry you lied to your wife? Sorry you stood by while she sold off family treasures? The hurt was too deep for a late-night text exchange to mend. Instead, I climbed the stairs to what used to be my bedroom, craving some small sense of comfort. But even that space had been stripped of its soul. The room, once painted in the soft blue I'd chosen as a teenager, now glared stark white. A treadmill stood where my bed used to be, flanked by a full-length mirror and racks of weights. It had been converted into a minimalist home gym, devoid of warmth or nostalgia. I found a yoga mat rolled in the corner, unrolled it near the far wall, and lay down. My body ached from emotional exhaustion, and the thought of driving back to my apartment felt impossible. So I stayed, surrounded by the shadows of who we used to be. Morning crept in on quiet feet. The sound of a key turning in the front door made me tense instinctively, my heart pounding. For a moment, I feared Allison was back for another confrontation, but it was Ryan who appeared in the doorway of the gym, looking worn and sleep-deprived. "You slept here?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Seemed easier than driving home," I replied, sitting up. "Where's Allison?" "She stayed at the hotel, didn't want me in the bed with her. Said I betrayed her." "Lisa." There was no sympathy in my expression. "Didn't you?" He exhaled slowly. "Yes. No. I don't know." Ryan slid down the wall and sat on the floor across from me. "I never meant for it to get this far, Maddie. What did you think would happen? That I'd never mention owning the house? That she'd never find out? I thought. When I met Allison, I was a mess. I'd lost everything. My job, Stephanie, my apartment. And then she showed up at that support group and saw me. Not as broken, but as someone who still had worth. When she assumed I owned the house, I didn't correct her. I liked how it felt to be seen as capable again. So you lied to impress her." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell the whole truth." "And what about selling off Mom and Dad's things? Was that also part of the image?" His face crumpled with shame. "That was her idea. She said we had to get rid of the old energy to start fresh. I tried to hide some of the things, stashed a few boxes in the attic, but she's persistent." "Persistent?" I echoed. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "She's not always like this," he said quickly. "She can be kind, supportive. She helped me when I couldn't get out of bed after the funeral." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the old maple tree Dad had planted. Its branches stretched toward the sky like pleading arms. "Did she really help you heal?" I asked softly. "Or did she find someone vulnerable and isolate him from everything familiar?" Ryan was quiet for a long time. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that since marrying her, you've missed every major family event. You changed the locks. You let her sell our parents' belongings. Does that sound like a healthy relationship to you?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "It's not that simple. She has trust issues, okay?" he said after a pause. "Her ex-husband? The one who died in a workplace accident?" "Yes." "Have you ever verified any of that? Met anyone from her life before you?" His silence was answer enough. "Ryan," I said gently, returning to sit beside him, "when was the last time you felt truly happy and safe around her? When you didn't feel like you were walking on eggshells?" He stared down at his hands, the same hands that once built Lego castles with me on rainy afternoons. "I don't know," he whispered. We sat together in silence as the sunlight climbed higher, illuminating the stripped-down room. "I miss them, Maddie," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom and Dad, I still reach for my phone to call them sometimes." "I know," I whispered. "Me too. I felt like I lost everything when they died, and then you were just handling it all. The estate, the legal stuff, your business. You didn't break down like I did." "I did," I said quietly. "You just didn't see it. I cried in the shower every morning. I buried myself in work so I wouldn't have to sit alone with the grief." He looked at me with fresh eyes. "You never showed it." "Because I was trying to be strong for you," I said. "That's what family does." He reached for my hand, gripping it tightly. "I'm so sorry, Maddie. I let you carry everything while I pretended to have it together." At that moment, his phone buzzed again and again. He pulled it from his pocket, frowning. "Allison," he said. "She keeps texting, asking where I am, why I'm not answering." "Does she always do that?" I asked. He hesitated. At first I thought it was sweet, but now it feels suffocating. He hesitated before continuing. "Last month I met an old colleague for lunch. She tracked my phone's location and showed up at the restaurant, accusing me of cheating." "Were you?" "No. It was just Jake. We were talking about a freelance project. After the scene she caused, Jake backed out. Said it wasn't a good fit after all." "Have you worked since then?" Ryan shook his head. "Not a single project in 2 months. This wasn't just about lost jobs or broken trust. This was about identity. His, mine, and ours as a family. You don't have to keep living like this," I said. "You can start over on your terms." His shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "Do you really think I can fix this?" I gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "You don't need to fix everything overnight, but you can choose what kind of life you want. You still have that power." And there, in that unfamiliar room that used to be mine, for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of my brother return. We had a long road ahead of us, but at least we were facing it together. Ryan's talent hadn't vanished. It had just been buried beneath months of self-doubt, eroded connections, and the creeping shadow of control. As we sat on the back porch, I asked him about his old colleagues, the close-knit group from his design studio. Matt, Eliza, the others who used to be like family. They were a bad influence, according to Allison, he said slowly, staring into his slice of pizza. She said they kept reminding me of my failure, of everything I lost when I got fired. He hesitated, then looked up. She deleted their contact info from my phone, while I was asleep. My breath caught. That was no longer just unhealthy, it was deliberate isolation. As Ryan talked, a pattern emerged, so clearly it felt like reading from a textbook. And I had, many times. Supporting friends in toxic relationships had taught me the markers: separation from loved ones, manipulation, financial control, eroded confidence, constant monitoring. "Ryan," I said carefully, "I think you might be in an emotionally abusive relationship." Huh. He opened his mouth to object, but stopped. "I've had the same thought," he admitted. "But then she does something thoughtful, makes my favorite meal, or tells me how scared she is to lose me, and I convince myself I'm being dramatic." "That's how it works," I said, gently. "It's a cycle. Tension, explosion, reconciliation, calm. Then it repeats." Over the next few hours, the floodgates opened. We talked with an honesty we hadn't shared in years. Ryan recounted how Allison policed his spending, critiqued his appearance, downplayed his career, and slowly revised the narrative of their relationship, casting herself as the savior who had rescued a broken man. "She told me no one else would ever put up with me," he said quietly, "that I was lucky someone still wanted me." Each word made my stomach twist. Abuse isn't always visible. Sometimes it hides behind gentle smiles and whispered insecurities, undermining from within until the victim doubts their worth completely. As the daylight faded, Allison's texts escalated, pinging his phone every few minutes. First, anger. "Why aren't you answering me? I'm calling the police again." Then desperation. "Baby, please, I'm scared. I can't do this without you." Ryan stared at his phone, torn between guilt and exasperation. Finally, he typed, "I need some space. Staying with a friend tonight." Her response came within seconds. "It's your sister, isn't it? She's poisoning you against me, after everything I've done for you?" Ryan powered off his phone. That night, I ordered pizza, and we ate under the porch lights as the cicadas hummed around us. For the first time in what felt like years, I saw the real Ryan surface, the dry wit, the spark of creativity, the brother I'd lost in a storm of grief and manipulation. "I've still been drawing," he admitted, pulling a small sketch pad from his backpack. "Late at night, when she's asleep." He flipped through pages of beautiful, haunting designs, branding concepts, illustrations, even a storyboard for a children's book. Only who says I'm wasting time when I draw? That it's not productive? I stared at the sketches, my throat tight. "Ryan, this is more than talent. This is who you are." He looked down. "I forgot." Later, I gave him some articles and support resources I'd found about emotional abuse and codependency. "You don't have to decide anything right now," I said, "but start by recognizing the patterns." He nodded, subdued but listening. The next morning, I found him already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, a notepad in front of him filled with scribbled lists. "I made this last night," he said without looking up. "Things she does that hurt or scare me. Stuff I've given up since we met. Lies I've told to avoid fights." He slid the notebook toward me. 7 full pages. I didn't need to read them. The fact that he had written them at all was a breakthrough. "What do you want to do?" I asked, gently. "I need space. Real space. Not a few hours, not an apology dinner. I need distance to think clearly." "You can stay here as long as you want," I said. "This house is part of your life, too." Ryan looked around the kitchen, taking in the sterile decor Allison had chosen, the emptiness, where our family's warmth used to be. His voice was quiet but firm. "No, this isn't home anymore." She erased everything that made it special. His words were painful, but there was a strength behind them. He was seeing the truth for the first time. The moment we'd been bracing for came that afternoon, a furious pounding at the front door, so loud it rattled the hinges. "All, Ryan, I know you're in there with her. Open this door, right now." We exchanged a look. Ryan's face was pale but steady. "I should talk to her," he said, rising slowly. "We'll both talk to her," I replied. When he opened the door, Allison's expression flickered rapidly. Rage, sweetness, concern. "Baby," she breathed, ignoring me entirely. "I've been so worried." "Why didn't you answer me?" She reached for him, but Ryan stepped back. I needed space. "You mean your sister got in your head?" she snapped, eyes narrowing. Actually, Ryan replied, Madison hasn't said much. I've been thinking for myself. Allison tried to brush past him, but he blocked the doorway. You can think at home, she said sharply. Let's go. I'm staying here for now, he said. Her mask slipped. In your sister's house? How pathetic, like a child running home to mommy. It's not pathetic to need support, he said firmly. Family isn't weakness. He's manipulating you, Allison hissed. She's always been jealous of us. You were finally independent and now she's dragging you back. I held my tongue, sensing this was Ryan's moment. She let me live here rent-free, he said. She kept quiet about the ownership lie because she didn't want to humiliate me. She supported me through everything, while you pushed me to burn every bridge I had. You think that's support? Allison shrieked. That's control. She needs you broken so she can feel superior. He didn't flinch. You know what's funny? Before I met you, I was healing. I was freelancing, reconnecting with old friends. I wasn't broken. You just needed me to be. That silenced her. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Fear of losing control. This isn't over, she said quietly. You'll regret this. Ryan didn't respond. He simply closed the door. That evening we took a walk through the neighborhood, the one where we'd once ridden bikes and delivered newspapers as kids. Neighbors waved cautiously, unsure of the tension that had passed through our front door hours earlier. But Ryan greeted them with quiet dignity, even managing a few smiles. It was the most like himself I'd seen him in years. Back at the house, we sorted through more boxes of family keepsakes tucked away in the attic. Each object unearthed came with a story. A birthday card from our 10th birthday party, a crayon drawing of our dog from 2nd grade, letters Dad had written to Mom during their early courtship. It was a slow reclamation, not just of objects but of identity. When the sun dipped below the horizon, we made tea in mismatched mugs, sat in the living room and talked about everything, our parents, the funeral, the grief we never fully unpacked. It wasn't closure, but it was connection. And that, for now, was enough. Ryan didn't have all the answers, yet, but he had clarity, and for the first time he also had choice. It was only since they got together that Ryan had become so isolated, so emotionally dependent, and it was as if acknowledging that aloud finally made something shift in the room. Allison, always ready to adapt, switched tactics immediately. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and her voice dropped to a fragile whisper. How can you say that, she asked, choking on emotion. After everything I've done for you. I saved you when you were at your lowest. No one else wanted you then. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to call out her manipulation for what it was. That's not true, Ryan replied gently. I had friends, I had family. You just convinced me they didn't care. Her tears disappeared as quickly as they came. The mask slipped off in an instant. With cold efficiency, she reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a manila folder. Fine, she said flatly. If that's how you want to play it. I've consulted a lawyer. As your wife, I have rights to this house, no matter whose name is on the deed. She waved a document at us with theatrical indignation. This is a formal claim of marital property rights. We've lived here together, we've made improvements. I'm entitled to at least half. I took the papers and scanned them. This isn't a legal document, Allison. It's something you typed up at home. My lawyer said, You haven't spoken to a lawyer. I cut in calmly. No attorney would put this together. It's full of misused legal terms. There's no case law cited, and the formatting doesn't meet any official standard. Her face flushed with rage. You don't know everything, Madison. Just because you think you're so smart with your real estate career. Actually, I interrupted again. Property law is part of my job, and for the record, I've already spoken to my attorney about this situation. That part wasn't exactly true. I had made the appointment but hadn't yet met with Catherine. Still, the bluff landed. Allison's eyes flickered with uncertainty. She turned to Ryan, dialing her tone back to a soft, pleading murmur. Please, baby, come home. We can work this out. I love you. Ryan looked torn for a long moment, but then he took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. I need time, Allison, he said. I'm not saying it's over, but I need space to think, and I need you to respect that. Respect? She hissed, her fragile mask cracking again. Like you respected me by lying about this house? You humiliated me. You're right, Ryan admitted. I lied, and I'm sorry. That's on me. But screaming, throwing things, calling the police on my sister, those are not healthy reactions either. So now it's all my fault? She shot back, voice rising. No one's saying that, I said gently, stepping in. You both need space right now. Stay out of this, she snapped. This is between me and my husband. Madison stays, Ryan said firmly. This is her house, and she's my sister. That stopped Allison cold. She stared at him, recalibrating. Her gaze turned calculating. Fine, she said coolly. Take your time. But don't forget, I've made sacrifices too. I've put my whole life on hold for this relationship. She turned to leave, but not before one final dagger. Oh, and by the way, I invited my parents to stay with us next month. Non-refundable tickets. Think about that. As her car pulled away, Ryan let out a long breath. Her parents aren't coming, he said quietly. She doesn't even speak to them. She's told me 3 different stories about why they're estranged. The manipulation never stops, does it? I asked. No, Ryan said, his voice heavy. It really does. The next morning, I met with Catherine Mendes, my real estate attorney. Sharp, efficient, and compassionate, she listened intently as I laid out the situation. You are the sole legal owner of the property, she confirmed. Allowing your brother to live there rent-free does not grant his spouse any claim, especially given the short duration of the marriage. What about the improvements they've made? Unless they can show significant, permanent structural changes that increase the home's value, it doesn't matter. Paint and furniture don't count. She drafted a formal letter clarifying ownership and requesting Allison remove her belongings within 2 weeks. We'll also prepare a formal eviction notice, just in case, Catherine added, but hopefully we won't need it. Meanwhile, Ryan was reclaiming his life piece by piece. He'd reached out to old colleagues from his design agency days, Matt, Eliza, and others he hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. They responded with nothing but support. Matt invited me to lunch tomorrow, he said, clearly nervous but hopeful. Their firm slammed with projects. They could use freelance help. That's great, I said sincerely. You're incredibly talented. They'd be lucky to have you. His smile faded. What if Allison shows up, makes a scene? Then Matt will see exactly why you've been out of touch, I said, and real friends will understand. 2 days later, Ryan returned from his lunch meeting with actual assignments and a part-time freelance contract. His eyes lit up as he described the projects. It felt so normal, he said, like the fog of the past 2 years is finally lifting. That evening, we hosted a casual dinner for Ryan's close friends. The house filled with laughter, creative energy, and camaraderie. Ryan animatedly discussed design trends, sketched on napkins, and for the first time in months I saw real joy on his face. After everyone left, he leaned against the kitchen counter and made a quiet declaration. I'm going to ask Allison for a separation, he said. I need to figure out who I am without her. The next morning, Ryan drafted a carefully worded message to Allison, requesting they begin a formal separation. He asked for space to reflect, and requested that all communication go through text or email for the time being. His hand trembled as he hit send, but when it was done, he looked visibly lighter. Later that day, he and I visited a local co-working space to inquire about short-term memberships. I need to re-establish a professional rhythm, he said. Get out of the house, meet people, design in a space that's mine. That evening, we took another walk through the neighborhood. A neighbor waved from across the street and said how good it was to see Ryan again. We missed you, she added. Ryan smiled, his eyes misting slightly. As we walked back, he paused in front of the old community center. Do you remember the art shows Mom used to take us to here? He asked. I nodded. You always said you wanted to exhibit your work. I still do, he said. I think I just forgot for a while. Back at home, we spent an hour cleaning out the basement, turning it into a makeshift studio for Ryan. It wasn't perfect, just an old drafting table, a lamp, and a chair, but it was his. For the first time in a long time, Ryan was creating from a place of self-worth rather than survival. The next day, I found him there, sketching with focus and calm. He looked up and smiled, genuinely, not forced or weary. I feel like myself again, he said simply. And for the first time in years, I believed him. The next morning, Ryan and I sat together at the kitchen table, drafting an email that was both compassionate and firm. Following Catherine's advice, we avoided an in-person conversation due to Allison's volatile behavior. Ryan carefully explained his need for space, offered to arrange a time for her to collect her belongings, and suggested they both pursue individual counseling before making any lasting decisions about their marriage. Allison's reply came within minutes, just one chilling line, "You'll regret this." That message changed everything. With Catherine's help, we immediately filed for a temporary restraining order, citing Allison's prior property destruction and threatening behavior. The court granted it, prohibiting her from entering the property without prior arrangement. Just 3 days later, we learned why the order had been necessary. A neighbor called to report that someone matching Allison's description had been spotted trying to enter through the back door of the house. We raced over. A rear window was shattered, and the moment we stepped inside, our stomachs dropped. The place was in disarray, cushions slashed, drawers upended, but the worst damage was in the master bedroom. "Liar" had been spray-painted across the wall in giant red letters. The mattress was gutted with a knife, and several family photos had been vandalized. My face was scratched out in each one. "We need to call the police," I said, pulling out my phone. Ryan stood there, pale and speechless. I never thought she'd go this far. Thankfully, the security cameras we installed after the first confrontation had captured everything. Officer Ramirez returned, this time with a new partner, and reviewed the footage with us. "This is a clear violation of the restraining order," Ramirez confirmed. "We'll put out an APB for her vehicle." Allison was found later that evening, sitting at a dive bar 3 miles away, still with spray paint residue on her hands. She was arrested for breaking and entering, vandalism, and violating a court order. While Ryan struggled with guilt over her arrest, the truth about Allison's past began to surface through legal discovery. The story she'd told about being a grieving widow was entirely fabricated. She had 2 previous marriages, both of which had ended with restraining orders filed against her. Her so-called deceased husband was alive and well, living in Arizona, and he too had a restraining order against her. "I should have seen the signs," Ryan muttered, overwhelmed by the revelations. "Manipulators are experts at what they do," I reminded him gently. "And you were grieving, you were vulnerable." As Allison faced legal consequences, Ryan moved forward with filing for divorce. Supported by friends, therapy, and the return of his creative energy, he was finally finding his footing again. A breakthrough came when the police located a storage unit rented under Allison's name. Inside were dozens of family heirlooms, Dad's mystery novels, Mom's silver tea set, even the vintage Tiffany lamp that had belonged to Grandma. She hadn't donated or sold them as she claimed. She'd hoarded them for herself. Recovering these treasures brought us both to tears. Each returned item felt like retrieving a piece of our parents, a fragment of the legacy we feared had been lost. Together, Ryan and I unpacked the boxes and restored the pieces to their rightful places in the house. Over the next 6 months, we experienced a period of profound change, more than we could have ever predicted. The house, once marred by tension and deception, began to transform into a place of comfort and healing. At first, it was just a practical decision. Ryan needed a safe place to stay, and I wanted to restore the home. But as the weeks turned into months, our cohabitation became something more meaningful. We were reconnecting, not just as siblings, but as partners in healing. Together we repainted every room, selecting colors that both honored our parents' taste and invited new energy. The formal living room, which Mom had kept in various shades of blue, was reborn in a tranquil seafoam green. Dad's study returned to the warm cedar he loved, modernized with crisp white trim. One afternoon, as we worked in the kitchen, Ryan ran his fingers along the old doorframe. "Remember how Dad used to mark our heights here every birthday?" I smiled. "He was so proud when you finally passed him. You were 16. "It acted like I'd won a gold medal," Ryan laughed. Memories that once stung now brought a bittersweet comfort. We were reclaiming our family story, not just through words, but through the physical space we had once shared. Ryan's therapy was working wonders. The man who had tiptoed around Allison's moods was gone. In his place stood someone regaining confidence, creativity, and self-worth. He secured a part-time position at his old design firm with the intention of transitioning to full-time. The creative director thanked me for coming back. He told me one night over dinner, said clients had been asking for my work. I grinned. "Of course they were. Your talent didn't go anywhere. It was just buried for a while." Meanwhile, I embarked on my own journey of healing. Under the guidance of Dr. Patel, I uncovered how my identity as the strong one had sometimes hurt more than helped. I had a habit of rescuing instead of empowering, solving problems for Ryan instead of helping him solve them himself. "There's a difference between helping and rescuing," Dr. Patel had told me. "Helping empowers, rescuing, even with the best intentions, can disempower." That insight shifted our relationship in small but powerful ways. I began asking for Ryan's input rather than making decisions on his behalf. In return, he started taking initiative, handling contractor negotiations for our bathroom renovation, researching investment options for the savings he was now steadily rebuilding. Every step forward, no matter how small, felt monumental. We held a soft opening for Ryan's new art portfolio one weekend, inviting close friends and former colleagues to view his recent work. The turnout was incredible. People were eager to reconnect, to support, and to celebrate him. Seeing him beam with pride as he discussed his pieces filled me with a quiet joy I hadn't felt in years. We framed a copy of one of his favorite sketches and placed it in the hallway, just across from the restored photo albums and Mom's jewelry box, symbols of resilience, restoration, and rebirth. As the weeks passed, the sense of unease began to ebb. The restraining order gave us a much-needed sense of safety. To bolster that, I arranged for a local security company to install a more advanced alarm system and reinforced locks on all exterior doors. Ryan also added motion sensor lights to the backyard, ensuring that no one could approach without being seen. These physical measures were just a part of reclaiming our sense of control. Inside, we shifted our focus toward renewal. Every room we cleaned, painted, or redecorated served as a small act of defiance against the chaos that had temporarily consumed our lives. Ryan printed some of his favorite sketches and framed them in the hall, giving the house a new aesthetic that reflected both healing and hope. Our Sunday dinners resumed, first just the two of us, then gradually expanding to include close friends. The dining room, once filled with tension, now rang with laughter and the comforting scent of home-cooked meals. Ryan started experimenting with cooking again, even reviving Dad's favorite chili recipe, which had once won a neighborhood contest. We spent long evenings sitting on the back porch, planning the garden for next spring. Ryan wanted to add wildflowers to attract bees and butterflies. I envisioned a small herb patch near the kitchen door. "Let's make this a place that reflects who we are now," he said one night, and I couldn't have agreed more. Through therapy, Ryan began to understand the deeper patterns that had made him vulnerable to someone like Allison. He started journaling regularly, documenting not just his progress, but also the feelings and memories that had once overwhelmed him. I watched him grow more self-assured each day. As for me, I had my own revelations. Dr. Patel helped me unpack how my identity as the responsible one had shaped my actions and relationships. I learned to set healthier boundaries, to support Ryan without stepping into the role of savior. It was liberating. Even the process of reclaiming our heirlooms became symbolic. Each returned item wasn't just an object, it was a memory restored, a wound partially healed. We created a display in the front room with the recovered photo albums, placing Mom's restored jewelry box beneath them like a quiet tribute. One morning, as we prepared to donate some old furniture to a shelter, Ryan turned to me and said, "You know, I'm finally starting to believe that I deserve peace." The simplicity of the statement brought tears to my eyes. And she eventually accepted a plea deal that included mandatory therapy, community service, and continued legal distance from both Ryan and me. "Do you ever wonder if she's actually getting help?" Ryan asked one Sunday, as we prepared our now traditional family dinner. We'd reclaimed the ritual, sometimes inviting friends, but always treating it as a sacred moment to reconnect. "I hope so," I said honestly, slicing carrots for the roast, not for our sake, but for hers, and for whoever she crosses paths with next. Ryan nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in thought. "I've been thinking about forgiveness lately. I'm not there yet, but I don't want to be consumed by anger anymore." "That's progress, right?" "It's huge progress," I said with a small smile. The recovery of our family heirlooms had been one of the most meaningful pieces of our healing journey. Every item Allison had stashed away under the pretense of donation or redesign had carried history. Now, Mom's hand-painted serving dishes were once again used for our Sunday meals. Dad's cherished leather-bound mystery novels had returned to their rightful place in the study. The Tiffany lamp, a wedding gift to Mom from her own mother, now illuminated her old reading nook. Most precious of all were the photo albums. We spent weekends organizing them, summer trips to Lake Michigan, Dad teaching us to fish, Mom's beaming pride the day she earned her master's degree. These weren't just memories, they were roots. As spring unfurled around us, Ryan began gently raising the idea of moving out. "It's not that I want to leave," he clarified one afternoon as we folded laundry together, "but I need to know I can stand on my own now." "I get it," I said, and I truly did. "Just know this house is always here. You're always home when you need to be." One warm evening, sitting on the back porch with a glass of Dad's favorite bourbon between us, Ryan spoke up again. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes on the horizon. "Maybe it's time we talk about what happens to the house. Long term." "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's legally yours, I know that, but it's our family home. Maybe we should consider sharing it. Officially." His words caught me off guard, in the best way. "After everything with Allison, are you sure you want to do that?" "That's exactly why," he said. She tried to take something that wasn't hers. This is different. This is about honoring what's always been true, that Mom and Dad left their legacy to both of us, just in different forms. We met with Catherine to set up a family trust, making the house an inheritance for us both, and securing it as a sanctuary for the future. By July, almost exactly a year after that unforgettable showdown with Allison, Ryan signed the lease on a cozy, light-filled apartment near his design firm. It was walking distance to work, with a sunroom perfect for sketching and a guest room he planned to turn into a client space. "I can't wait to build my own space from the ground up," he said as he showed me around. I noticed family photos already displayed on shelves, not hidden or cropped, but fully present. Among them was a recent photo, Ryan and me on the porch of the family home, laughing as we recreated a goofy childhood pose from decades earlier. "You look ready," I told him, squeezing his shoulder. "Thanks to you," he said. "No," I replied gently. "You did the hard work. I just gave you the space to do it." That night, as I drove back home, I passed the familiar landmarks of our childhood neighborhood. Everything looked a little softer, a little more serene. The journey behind us had been rough terrain. But we'd made it. What started as a dispute over property had become something much deeper, a confrontation with identity, truth, and the invisible wounds grief can leave behind. We didn't just recover lost items or mend broken trust. We rebuilt something stronger than what we had before. I learned that helping someone doesn't mean saving them. It means believing in their ability to save themselves. Ryan learned that love, real love, doesn't require self-erasure. We both learned that the truth, while often uncomfortable, builds far sturdier foundations than even the most beautiful lies. As I pulled into the driveway, the house welcomed me with its familiar creaks and comforting silence. It wasn't empty, even though Ryan had moved out. It was full of memory, of peace, of history. I poured a glass of bourbon and raised it to the framed family photo over the mantel. Mom, Dad, Ryan, and me, awkward grins, wild hair, and so much unspoken love. "We're okay," I said quietly to them. "We made it through." The next morning, I tended the herb garden Ryan and I had started together. Lavender and thyme thrived by the back steps, the scent fresh and grounding. Life was finding its way back into every corner of this place. That weekend, Ryan stopped by with an envelope. Inside was a delicate hand-drawn portrait of our parents sitting together on the porch. Mom in her favorite shawl, Dad holding a book. "For you," he said simply. The drawing now hangs where visitors can see it when they enter, a quiet reminder of legacy, loss, and love. We still meet every Sunday for dinner. Sometimes it's just us. Sometimes we invite people who've become part of our story. We light candles, cook meals from old recipes, and talk about where we've been and where we're going. The house, once filled with pain and deception, is alive again. And if you've made it this far in our story, I want to thank you for listening, for witnessing, for perhaps even seeing some of your own struggles reflected here. Maybe you've had to defend something precious, or help someone you love find their way back to themselves. Maybe you've learned, as we have, that setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting people out. It means opening space for healing. If any part of this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it. Share your thoughts below. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this one. And know this: the hardest boundaries to set are often the ones that bring the greatest healing. Thank you again for spending this time with me. I wish you clarity, strength, and healing wherever your journey takes you.